His leather coats felt different until one man found a tattoo head buried with his brother. In 1885, in the foggy outskirts of New Orleans, Elias Devereux wasn't just a tailor, he was a master of the impossible. His leather suits, unlike anything anyone had ever seen, didn't just look perfect, they felt alive. But it wasn't until one man found a tattoo buried deep in the flesh of one of these garments that the horrifying truth came to light. Elias had been sewing human flesh into his suits, and what he had unknowingly created was something far darker than he ever imagined. This isn't just a story about fashion, it is the story of a tailor who stitched together a nightmare in his pursuit of immortality. Elias Devereux had built his reputation as a tailor in New Orleans, but he wasn't just any craftsman. His name was whispered with reverence, and for good reason. His work was perfection. In a city known for its rich history and vibrant culture, his shop stood apart. It wasn't just a tailor's workshop, it was a sanctuary of sorts. People came from all over, seeking his legendary suits, each one a masterpiece that spoke to something deeper than mere fashion. His suits were known to be alive and not in the literal sense, of course, but the effect they had on those who wore them was nothing short of uncanny. It was said that when you donned one of Elias' creations, you didn't just look different, you felt different. The leather felt too soft, too warm, as if the fabric was breathing. You could almost hear whispers in the silence, a low hum that made your heart race. At first, no one said anything. It was just strange, but those who wore the suits often came back for more, as if drawn in by an invisible thread. It was only when a well-known businessman, Robert Carter, returned one of Elias' best suits that the first real inkling of something was wrong came to light. Carter was an imposing man, known for his ironclad demeanor and calculating business sense. When he came storming back into Elias' shop, his face twisted in discomfort, Elias couldn't help but notice the fear in his eyes. "There's something wrong with this suit," Carter said, voice shaky, yet heavy with authority. He handed the suit back to Elias, his fingers twitching like they were trying to rid themselves of some invisible stain. Elias took the suit, inspecting it with a craftsman's eye. It looked perfect, like all his other pieces, elegant, timeless. But when he ran his hands along the leather, something caught him off guard. It felt warmer than it should, livelier. He brushed it off as a trick of the light or his tired fingers, but Carter wasn't done. "It's not just the warmth," Carter continued, his voice lowering. "When I wore it, I felt something, like I was not myself. My thoughts felt clouded, like someone else was in my head." He paused, his face paling as if recalling a dark memory. "I don't know how to explain it, but it's as though that suit wasn't just made from leather. It's something else." Elias blinked, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. He knew what Carter meant. It was a feeling he had sensed before but had never dared to confront. His suits had a life of their own. The warmth, the unsettling humid was all too real. But he had never thought to question it. The thought of immortality, of perfection, consumed him, and in his drive to create the finest garments, Elias hadn't considered the cost. Carter stormed out of the shop, leaving Elias alone with the suit in his hands. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about it, that life at essence wasn't just in the leather, it was in the very fabric of the creation itself. But what was it? What was he truly stitching into his suits? And how far could he push this obsession with perfection before it consumed him? Over the next few days, Elias found himself becoming obsessed with the suit. Every time he touched it, he could feel an odd sensation, as though the leather was alive, almost aware. He studied the stitching more closely, noticing faint imperfections in the thread imperfections he couldn't recall making. It was as though the suit had been crafted by someone else entirely. He couldn't help himself. He had to know. So, late one night, when the shop was empty and the streetlights flickered dimly outside, Elias decided to experiment. He cut a small slit in the lining of the jacket, just enough to peer inside. What he saw shocked him. Beneath the leather, underneath the fine fabric, was flesh that looked too real, too alive. His mind raced. What was this? How had this happened? The texture, the heat, the pulsate was as though a piece of something human had been sewn into the suit itself. The next day, Elias locked the door to his shop. He knew he had crossed a line, but he couldn't turn back now. He had to understand what he was dealing with. In the back of his mind, he wondered if he had unknowingly stumbled onto something so unnatural that it could ruin everything he had built. Yet, part of him couldn't stop the curiosity, the hunger to push the boundaries of his craft. As the days passed, Elias grew more and more absorbed by the mystery of his own creation. He began to study anatomy books, poring over pages about skin, flesh, and the human body. The more he read, the more an idea began to form. What if he could take his work further? What if he could sew more than just leather? What if he could use flesh, real flesh, to make his suits not just perfect, but immortal? His obsession turned into an experiment. Elias' mind raced with possibilities. Could the soul of a person be trapped within the leather, preserved for eternity? Could he take a living person's essence and lock it into a suit, a garment that would never age, never fade? It was crazy, but it was genius. In his desperation to create something timeless, he could almost feel the answer on the tip of his fingers. That night, Elias made a decision. He took to the streets of New Orleans, searching for an answer. The city was dark and quiet, the fog rolling in from the river, casting everything in a ghostly haze. Elias was no longer the man he once was. The desire for perfection had warped his mind. He no longer cared about the moral implications. You wanted to create something that would live forever, and if it meant using human flesh to do it, then so be it. It wasn't long before Elias found what he was looking for. A man wandering the streets alone, drunk, lost, a perfect candidate for Elias' experiment. He approached him, and within moments, the man was gone, his body used for Elias' purpose. Elias took the flesh, the lifeblood, and began his work. It was grueling, messy, but Elias felt a strange thrill as he stitched the pieces together. Each cut, each stitch, was a step closer to his goal, immortality. When the suit was complete, Elias stepped back and surveyed his creation. It was like nothing he had ever made before. The leather was smooth, yes, but there was something else about it, a warmth, a pulse, a feeling that the suit was alive. He couldn't explain it, but as he ran his fingers over the seams, something whispered in the back of his mind. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. The suit was alive, and Elias was no longer just a tailor. He had become something else, a man who had dared to defy nature itself. But little did he know, what he had created wasn't just a suit. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his days. But Elias wasn't done yet. His obsession had only just begun, and the consequences of his actions would soon come to collect what was owed. Elias had crossed a line. He knew that, even before he stood over his latest creation, inspecting the leather suit that now held the remains of a man. The warmth of the leather felt almost too much like flesh, and the pulse of life he could sense emanating from it disturbed him. But there was something more, something deeper that he could not ignore. The suit, as incredible as it was far from perfect. It lacked the spark he had been hoping for. It had a life, yes, but not the one he intended. It wasn't just the suit, it was his obsession. The idea of creating something immortal, something beyond the reach of time, had consumed him. He had always been driven to achieve perfection, but now the goal was no longer about skill. It was about defying the inevitable, defying death itself. The question burned in his mind, what if he could do it? What if he could bring someone back, trap their soul in the leather, and make them eternal? But the answer eluded him. The suit, though lifelike, wasn't enough. Elias needed more. He needed to perfect his craft, and that meant pushing further than anyone else had dared. He spent nights in his shop, obsessing over anatomy books, making more and more notes in his journals. But there was a problem. The suits he had created, while impressive, lacked a certain soul. He had not captured the essence of the people within them. They were simply vessels. His suits were beautiful, but they didn't sing, they didn't live, they weren't immortal. Not yet. And so, Elias made a decision. He would no longer use just scraps of flesh, would use an entire body, one that was close to him, one that held meaning. He needed someone whose essence would seep deeply into the fibers of the leather. He needed someone who had lived, someone whose spirit was still tied to the world. His brother. Matthew had always been Elias' closest companion, the one who understood his obsession with perfection, the one who had never questioned his drive. They were a perfect match, two sides of the same coin. But now, Matthew was gone, taken by an accident that shattered Elias' world. Elias mourned, but the grief quickly transformed into something darker, something more dangerous. For a moment, he thought about the impossible idea of using Matthew's body to complete his work. He would bring him back. He would preserve his brother, not in memory, but in flesh, forever. At first, the thought sickened him, but that was before he had seen what the suits could do. He had seen the strange sensations they evoked, the way they made people feel alive. The idea of using his brother's remains, as macabre as it seemed, had become an obsession, a compulsion he could not shake. Elias prepared for the unthinkable. He used his connections in the city to secure a place where he could work undisturbed, away from prying eyes. There was no turning back now. He would use Matthew's body to perfect his creation. The suit would not just hold his brother's body, it would hold his soul, his essence. The night was long and cold when Elias returned to the city with Matthew's remains. The streets were empty, the fog thick, and the air heavy with the smell of decay. He felt his pulse quicken as he entered his shop, locking the door behind him. His heart raced with anticipation, but deep inside, a small voice whispered, "What are you doing?" But it didn't matter. The decision was made. Elias carefully unwrapped his brother's body, placing it on the table in front of him. He worked meticulously, cutting, stitching, and crafting the leather. The pieces came together with unnatural ease, the leather stretching and folding perfectly around Matthew's body as the hours passed. Elias could feel his grip on reality slipping. He worked without stopping, the darkness of the shop swallowing him whole. The air seemed to hum with the energy of his creation, and in those moments, Elias felt as though he could feel his brother's presence. Not just in his mind, but around him. The spirit of Matthew lingered, watching, guiding Elias' hands as he completed the final stitching. The suit was finished. Elias stepped back and surveyed his work. It was perfect. There were no imperfections, no flaws. The leather gleamed under the dim light of the shop, and as Elias ran his hands over it, he could feel the pulse of life beneath the surface. It was as though Matthew was still there. Inside the suit, his presence undeniable. But when Elias put the suit on, something strange happened. At first, it felt like wearing the finest leather, but then, it became something more. He felt a chill run down his spine, as though the very essence of his brother was now a part of him. He could hear Matthew's voice, faintly in the back of his mind, welcome back. For a brief moment, Elias felt triumphant. He had done it. He had perfected his craft. He had conquered death. But then, the suit changed. It wasn't the soft leather he expected. The warmth turned to a cold, almost suffocating sensation. The whispers became louder, more demanding. Elias' mind began to fracture as he tried to tear the suit off, but it clung to him like a second skin. It felt wrong, like it was feeding off of him. A wave of dizziness hit him, and he staggered, the room spinning around him. He couldn't escape. The suit was no longer just a garment, it had become alive, and it was feeding on his very essence. The soul of his brother, trapped within the leather, was now awakening, but it wasn't Matthew's soul that had taken control. Elias had made a mistake. The suit wasn't just holding Matthew, it was absorbing everything around it, every piece of life it could find. The suit had become a monster. Desperation gripped Elias as he clawed at the leather, trying to rip it from his body. But the suit didn't let go. Instead, it pulled him deeper into its grasp, tightening around him with each desperate breath he took. The pulse of life was now suffocating him, and he realized, too late, that he had made the ultimate mistake. His creation was no longer a tool, it was a weapon that would destroy him from the inside out. Just as Elias thought he could bear it no longer, he heard the voice of his brother again. But it wasn't comforting, it wasn't guiding him, it was laughing. A cold, empty laugh that echoed in the depths of his mind. But Elias wasn't done yet. The suit was changing, growing stronger, and soon it would claim everything he had left, and worse, it would begin to seek out new victims, hungry for more souls to trap within its seams. Elias had created a masterpiece, or so he had believed. He thought that by stitching his brother's body into the finest leather, he could bring him back, preserve his soul and eternal life. But the suit had betrayed him. The lifeless leather had become a prison, trapping Matthew's essence in a twisted mockery of immortality. And yet, Elias couldn't escape the thought, what if he could make it right? The air in the shop grew colder as Elias struggled to free himself from the suffocating grip of the suit. He tugged and pulled at the seams, his hands trembling, desperate for release. But the suit didn't loosen. It clung to him as though it were made for him, molded perfectly to his body. The harder he tried to escape, the tighter it seemed to tighten around him. For a moment, Elias felt the weight of his brother's presence, a faint pulse in the leather. It wasn't Matthew's voice, not exactly. But Elias knew that something within the suit had awakened, something far darker than what he had intended. He had created a vessel, yes, but not for his brother's soul. This was something else entirely, and Elias realized, too late, that he had made a grave mistake. He staggered toward the mirror, eyes wide, face pale. His reflection stared back at him. But it wasn't just him. He could see Matthew, too, in the suit. The dark eyes staring back at him weren't just his own. They were his brother's. The features blurred and shifted in the reflection, and the more Elias looked, the more his brother's face became a part of him. He was no longer just Elias. He was Elias and Matthew, trapped inside this nightmare. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with thoughts and images that weren't his own. Matthew was reaching out from within the suit, pulling Elias deeper into the abyss. There was something unnatural about its sensation of his brother's memories flooding him, taking over his thoughts. Memories of a life now lost, memories that were not supposed to exist anymore. And the worst part? Elias realized with horror that he was no longer sure where Matthew's memories ended and his began. The shop felt colder. His breath came in shallow gasps, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the suit. The scent of leather was overpowering, mingled with the faint, unmistakable odor of decay. It was as if Matthew's very being had begun to rot inside the fabric. No, Elias thought, desperately clawing at his chest. He couldn't let it happen. He couldn't let his brother be lost forever. Elias had crossed a line, but in that moment, as he struggled to free himself, he began to question whether he had been cursed from the start. The obsession to keep his brother Alivato, preserve him at all costs, had driven him to madness. The perfection he sought had only brought ruin. And the worst part? He didn't even know if Matthew was still alive within the suit or if something darker had taken over entirely. But Elias wasn't ready to give up. The thought of his brother's body, his brother's soul, trapped in the leather, refused to leave his mind. He couldn't stop now, not when he was so close to achieving the impossible. He had to fix this. He had to prove that immortality was real. Driven by desperation, Elias sought out a solution. He couldn't work in his shop, not in the state he was in, so he moved to a secluded part of New Orleans, a place where no one would find him. He could feel the weight of the suit pressing against him, its power growing stronger with each passing day. His obsession reached new heights, but this time, he wasn't creating a suit for fashion or perfection. No, this time, he needed to free Matthew from the leather prison he had placed him in. But how? What could he do to break the curse he had unknowingly unleashed? Elias' mind raced with possibilities. He started to experiment, trying to find some way to break the connection between Matthew and the suit. He tried everything, burning the leather, tearing it apart, even attempting to drown it, but nothing worked. Each attempt only seemed to strengthen the suit's hold on him. In his madness, Elias turned to ancient texts, old rituals he thought were mere superstition. He tried everything he could think of: summoning rituals, incantations, forbidden magic, all in the hopes of breaking the bond between Matthew's soul and the suit. But each time, the suit only became stronger, and with each failed attempt, Elias could feel himself slipping further into madness. He hadn't realized it at the time, but the suit wasn't just holding his brother's soul, it was growing. It was feeding on Elias' energy, pulling him deeper into its grasp, absorbing his very essence. And like a parasite, it began to change him. One night, as Elias stood before a mirror, attempting another failed ritual, something caught his eye. His reflection didn't just look like him anymore. He could see Matthew there, staring back at him, but it wasn't just his brother's image, it was his own face distorted, warped into something grotesque. What have I done? Elias thought, horrified by what he saw. He had become something other, something less than human. The suit was no longer just a garment. It was a part of him, a part of Matthew, and they were both trapped, bound to this wretched creation. It was at that moment Elias realized something even more terrifying. The suit had never been just a vessel for immortality. It had been a gateway, a door-own that was slowly consuming him, piece by piece, memory by memory. But what was the price of his immortality? Elias couldn't bear the thought of living forever as a shell of a man, trapped in this suit with his brother's soul. Yet he also couldn't bear the thought of letting Goof abandoning the dream of eternal life that had driven him for so long. He had become so consumed by his obsession that the line between life and death had blurred, and now he was paying the price. As the days turned into weeks, Elias began to lose himself entirely. He could feel the leather tightening around his body, as though it were merging with his very skin. And with each passing day, he felt less and less like himself, more and more like a stranger trapped inside his own body. He was becoming part of the suit, part of the curse he had created, and in his madness, he made the most horrifying discovery of all. It wasn't just his brother's soul that had been trapped inside the suit. It was every soul he had ever used to create his garments, every piece of flesh, every life. All of them had been absorbed into the leather, and they were all waiting to be freed. And Elias had become one of them, but Elias wasn't finished. The suit wasn't just a prison for his brother anymore, it was a prison for everyone it had ever touched, and soon it would demand more lives, more souls to feed its insatiable hunger. Elias stood before the mirror again, his face a pale reflection of the man he used to be. The suit clung to him like a second skin, a grotesque extension of his own body. It wasn't just leather anymore, it was alive, and it had become part of him in ways he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Each movement, each breath, felt like he was sharing his body with something far darker than himself. The whispers were constant now, swirling in the back of his mind, impossible to ignore. He could hear Matthew's voice a distant, cold, and beneath it something else, something hungry. The transformation wasn't just physical. Elias felt his mind splintering, his thoughts becoming a blur of his brother's memories and his own. He no longer knew where Matthew's consciousness ended and his began. The pain of it was unbearable, and yet somehow Elias still clung to the hope that there was a way out. There had to be. His obsession had led him to this moment. He had crossed lines he never thought possible, and now the consequences of his actions were bearing down on him like a relentless storm. But the worst part wasn't the suit. No, the worst part was the realization that he had created something beyond himself, something that could no longer be controlled. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a vessel, a prison, yes, but a prison for something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. Every suit Elias had ever made was a vessel, each one carrying a part of a soul, but now the suits had begun to evolve. They had become something else, something that was feeding on him, on them. Every person whose flesh had been sewn into the leather had become part of the suit. Each soul trapped inside was waking up, restless, seeking release. And then there was the tattoo buried beneath the layers of flesh. Elias had forgotten about it, buried it in the madness of his work. The mark that once belonged to him and Matthew, the symbol of their shared bond, was now a reminder of everything he had done wrong. He had never intended for the tattoo to become a key, but it had. It had somehow embedded itself into the very fabric of the suit, turning it into a link between the dead and the living, between his brother's soul and those trapped within the leather. It had become a symbol of everything Elias had sacrificed in his pursuit of perfection. The whispers grew louder, as though the tattoo itself was calling out to him. Elias couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed answers, and the only way to find them was to face the horror head-on. His mind raced, the desperation taking hold. He had to break the cycle. He had to save Matthew. But how? How could he undo what he had done? Every thought he had brought him back to the same place. There was no escape. The suit was too powerful, and it was growing stronger by the day. The realization struck him like a cold fist. The more time passed, the more impossible it would be to separate himself from it. He had already become one with the suit, one with the souls trapped inside. It was only a matter of time before his own soul was consumed. Elias knew what he had to do. He had to destroy the suit, the very thing that was feeding on him. But that meant destroying himself in the process. And the more he thought about it, the more he understood. This was his final test. He stepped into the center of the room, the heavy weight of the suit pressing down on him like 1,000 unseen hands. His body ached, his breath ragged. The whispers were deafening now, clamoring for release, for freedom, for vengeance. But Elias stood tall, resolute in his decision. This was the end. This was the only way to stop the madness he had created. But as Elias prepared to destroy the suit, something stopped him. A voice, clear and unmistakable, whispered his name, Elias. He froze, the voice coming from somewhere deep within the leather. It was Matthew's voice, but it didn't sound like Matthew. The warmth he had once felt in his brother's presence was gone, replaced by an icy chill. The suit wasn't just a prison, it was a trap for more than just Elias, brother. You can't escape me. The words sent a chill down Elias' spine. He looked down at the suit, horrified. What had he done? The suit had become more than just leather and flesh. It had become something alive, something that had no intention of letting go. The voice continued, its tone cold and mocking. You thought you could trap me, didn't you? You thought you could control death itself, but you were wrong, Elias. You can never escape me. Not now, not ever. Elias stumbled back, his heart racing. The suit had changed. It was no longer just a vessel for Matthew's soul. It had absorbed something else, something worse, something that had been feeding off Elias' fear, his guilt, his obsession. The suit had become a living entity, a monster that had learned to control him, just as he had tried to control it. Desperation gripped Elias as he tried to pull away, but the suit tightened, its grip stronger than ever. It was pulling him into its dark embrace, swallowing him whole. He could feel it, could feel the souls within the leather pushing against him, trying to break free. The more they struggled, the more powerful the suit became, and Elias realized, too late, that he had created a cycle that could never be broken. He wasn't just bound to the suit, was becoming part of it. "You thought immortality would save you," the voice mocked. "But it's a curse, Elias, and now it's yours to bear for eternity." In that moment, Elias understood the full scope of his mistake. The immortality he had sought was not a gift, it was a curse, and now he was trapped within it. Not just his brother's soul, but every soul he had ever taken, every life he had ever stolen, was alive within the suit, and there was no escaping it. The suit tightened around him as the voices grew louder, a cacophony of screams and whispers, each one more desperate than the last. He could feel them, the souls pulling him deeper into the darkness, and he realized that he wasn't just trapped within the suite, had become the suit. He was now part of the cursed cycle, doomed to feed the suit's insatiable hunger for eternity. Elias could only watch in horror as the darkness consumed him, his last thought a desperate cry for redemption that would never come. But Elias wasn't the only one trapped in the suit. The souls it had absorbed were awakening, and they were hungry. They weren't the only ones who had been changed, and soon they would be free. Elias had become a shadow of the man he once was. His body no longer moved with the same grace it once had, weighed down by the suit he had so carefully crafted. His reflection in the mirror was not just his own, it was a grotesque amalgamation of himself and the souls trapped inside the leather. The weight of their presence was suffocating. He could feel them clawing at the edges of his consciousness, their whispers louder with each passing moment. He had become what he feared most, nothing more than a part of the very thing he had created. But there was something more, something Elias hadn't fully realized until now, the tattoo. It had always been there, buried deep beneath the layers of leather, beneath the flesh that he had sewn together. The tattoo had been his and Matthew's. It had been a symbol of their brotherly bond, a mark they had shared since childhood. But now, the tattoo had become something far darker. It wasn't just a symbol of their relationship anymore. It was a key, a link between Elias, Matthew, and the other souls trapped within the suit. A link that Elias couldn't sever, no matter how hard he tried. He had never paid much attention to it, at least not until now. The tattoo, now twisted and faintly visible through the cracked seams of the leather, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Elias could feel it calling to him, pulling at his soul. He was drawn to it, unable to resist. His fingers hovered over the mark, and as they touched it, a surge of cold ran through him. A flash of memory flooded Elias Mindone that wasn't his own. He saw Matthew, but not as he remembered him. Matthew was standing in a dark room, a look of terror in his eyes, the same eyes that now stared back at Elias from within the suit. The memory was fragmented, a jumbled collection of emotions and images. But one thing was clear: Matthew had been aware of what Elias was doing. He had been aware of the horror that Elias was trying to bring him back from the dead. But that didn't matter now. The suit had trapped him, it had taken his soul, and now Matthew's spirit was no longer his own. Elias' heart sank as the full realization hit him. The tattoo was not just a symbol of their bond, it was a curse. The mark had tied them together, bound them in a way that could never be undone. And worse yet, it had tied every other soul Elias had ever trapped within the leather. All of them were now part of him, part of the suit, part of this unholy cycle. Elias ripped his hand away from the tattoo, but the feeling didn't leave. The voices grew louder, more frantic. They were awake. The souls trapped inside the suit were no longer passive. They were struggling to break free, each one desperate to escape their eternal prison. Elias could hear their cries in his mind, their desperation rising with every passing moment. And at the center of it all was the hunger for life, for freedom, for release. The suit was not just a vessel, it was a predator now, and Elias had unwittingly become its host. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Let us out," they begged. "Let us be free." Elias stumbled back, his mind racing. What had he done? What had he created? This was no longer just a cursed garment. This was a monster, a living, breathing entity, feeding off the souls it had absorbed, and now it wanted more. It wanted to be free. But how could he stop it? How could he undo the damage he had caused? The answer was simple: he couldn't. The suit had evolved beyond anything he could control. It had learned to feed, and now it was hungry for more. And Elias was nothing more than a pawn in its game. In his desperation, Elias tore at the seams of the suit, trying to break free, but it was futile. The more he struggled, the tighter the leather seemed to grip him, the more it took. And then, something unimaginable happened. The tattoo, once faint and almost invisible, began to glow. A deep, unnatural light pulsed from it, and Elias could feel it spreading through his body. It was like fire, burning through his veins, searing through his flesh. The tattoo was no longer just a mark, it was alive. And now it was calling to him. Elias fell to his knees, unable to move, unable to scream. The pain was unbearable, but it was more than just physical. It was mental, as if the suit were reaching into his mind, pulling at his very soul. The whispers were no longer just voices, they were memories. His memories, Matthew's memories, and the memories of every soul trapped inside the leather. They all flooded Elias' mind at once, crashing over him like an unstoppable wave. But in that moment, something else emerged from the chaosan image. A face. It was Matthew's, but it was distorted, twisted by the horrors of the suit. Matthew was reaching out to him, his eyes wide with terror. "Help me," Matthew's voice echoed in Elias' mind. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to be part of it. You have to let me go, Elias." But it was too late. Elias' body was no longer his own. The suit had claimed him, and now it had claimed Matthew too. It wasn't just a piece of leather, it was a prison, a place where souls were trapped and forced to feed on each other. Elias had created a cycle that could never be broken, a cycle of eternal hunger. "You did this," the voice of Matthew whispered. "You trapped me, Elias, and now you will never escape." The suit tightened around Elias' body as the tattoo burned brighter, sending a surge of energy through him. The pain was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the feeling of his own soul being pulled into the leather. He could feel himself slipping away, his thoughts becoming foggy. He was losing himself. But then, the suit stopped. The pressure eased, and Elias was left breathless, trembling on the floor. His body felt strange, heavy, as though he were no longer in control of it. And then he heard its sound of the suit's hunger louder now. It was calling out to him, demanding more, demanding souls. The voices screamed, the desperation palpable in their cries, but one voice stood out among them, all the voice of his brother, Matthew. "It's too late for us," Matthew whispered, his voice breaking through the chaos. "But it's not too late for you. You can still stop it." Elias' eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The suit was awake, and it was seeking new souls to consume. The cycle was about to begin again. But Elias wasn't the only one being pulled into the suit's darkness. The hunger had begun to spread, and now it was no longer just after his soul. It was after everyone. The days blurred into one another as Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, consumed by the suit that now ruled his every waking moment. His reflection in the mirror had become a twisted mockery of himself. His once sharp features were now contorted, his face a patchwork of his own flesh and the essence of those souls trapped within the leather. It was as if the suit had absorbed not only their lives but their very identities, folding them into its dark tapestry. And now, Elias was no longer just wearing the suit, was becoming it. But the worst part wasn't the transformation. It wasn't the suit's physical grip on him or the constant whispers of the trapped souls. No, the worst part was the possession. At first, Elias tried to resist. He fought against the overwhelming tide of memories and emotions that weren't his own. He could feel Matthew's anger, his sorrow, his confusion, all mingling with his own thoughts. He could hear the voices of other strangers, victims he had never met, imploring him for release. It was like an avalanche of memories, each one trying to overwrite his consciousness, pushing him closer to the brink of insanity. But no matter how hard he fought, the suit was winning. Every night, Elias would lie in bed, unable to sleep. The suit was a constant presence, suffocating him with its weight. The souls inside were restless, agitated, and the hunger was growing stronger. He could feel it in his veins, crawling under his skin, pulling at his very essence. The voices became clearer, more distinct, until they were no longer whispers. They were shouts, screams, and then, one night, it happened. Elias awoke with a jolt, his body drenched in sweat. His breath came in ragged gasps as he sat up in the darkness, the air thick with the stench of leather and decay. But it wasn't just the suit that smelled now, it was him. Elias could smell his own flesh, rotting from the inside out, consumed by the suit's insatiable hunger. As he stumbled toward the mirror, he realized with horror that he wasn't alone. His reflection had changed. The face staring back at him wasn't just Elias anymore. It was Matthew's too, but it wasn't just Matthew's. The features were distorted, grotesque, as if they were being pulled and twisted by an unseen force. Elias no. Matthew's eyes stared back at him, wide and wild with panic. For a moment, Elias thought he was losing his mind, but then the voice came, not from his own mind but from the suit. "You cannot hide, Elias. You belong to me now. All of you." Elias gasped, his body seizing as the suit began to move. It wasn't just on him anymore, it was in him. His limbs began to twitch involuntarily, as if the suit had taken full control. It was as though he were no longer the master of his own body. The hunger, the screams, the desperate pleas from the souls trapped within the leather everything was alive inside him. The suit had possessed him. It was like being trapped in his own body, a prisoner to his own creation. He could feel the souls Matthew fighting for control, but they were too weak, too lost. The suit had become a force of its own, feeding off their desperation, growing stronger with each passing moment. The voices became clearer, louder, but the most chilling thing of all was the way they began to speak in unison. "Release us, Elias. We are your brother now. We are all you have left." The horror of it all hit him like a wave. Elias wasn't alone, not anymore. The suit had become a prison, a trap for the souls of everyone it had ever consumed. And now, they were speaking to him, controlling him. They were no longer merely trapped, they were active, fighting for dominance, clawing their way to the surface. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when Elias realized the suit wasn't just feeding on his body, it was changing him. The more he fought against it, the more he felt his humanity slipping away. His hands trembled, his skin stretched, and the warmth he had once felt from his own body began to dissipate, replaced by the cold, suffocating pressure of the leather. He could feel the souls taking hold of his thoughts. They were now a part of him, influencing his every decision. He couldn't think straight anymore, couldn't tell where his own mind ended, and the suit's influence began. For the first time in days, Elias tried to scream, but the suit stopped him, its grip tightening around his throat. He felt like he was suffocating, drowning in his own body, powerless to break free. The voices continued to mock him, to call to him, their laughter cold and hollow. "You thought you could control death, Elias," Matthew's voice hissed. "You thought you could keep me, but we are one now." Elias clutched at his chest, feeling his heart race. The suit was alive. It was more than just leather. It was an entity, a being that had consumed everything Elias had been, everything Matthew had been, everything the suit had ever touched. In that moment, Elias realized the horror of what he had done. The suit was no longer a garment, it was a vessel for the living dead, and it had come to life. It had learned to feed, and now it was feeding on him. But there was no escape, there was no breaking free. Elias had created this monster, and now he was its prisoner. The suit had become a part of him, and in doing so, had taken everything from him, his humanity, his brother, his soul. Just when Elias thought he couldn't take it anymore, a voice broke through the chaos, a voice that wasn't his own. It wasn't the suit, it wasn't Matthew. It was something new, something different. "You can stop this, Elias. It's not too late." Elias' mind seized on the voice. It was a memory, a faint glimmer of hope, and for the first time since the suit had claimed him, Elias felt something deep inside shift. The voice had come from the depths of the suit, but it was different this time. It wasn't one of the souls trapped inside. It wasn't Matthew. It wasn't a prisoner of the suit. It was free, and it was speaking to him. "You have the power to undo this," the voice urged. "You must destroy the suit. It's the only way to free yourself and the others. You are the key." But the words didn't bring Elias relief. Instead, they filled him with dread. The suit was alive, and if he destroyed it, what would be left? Would he survive? Would anyone? The pressure in his chest grew, but with it, so did a newfound strength, a will to fight. He couldn't let this monster live. He couldn't let the cycle continue. But the fear remained, gnawing at him. Would he truly be able to destroy what he had created? Or would the suit consume him entirely? Elias had the power to destroy the suit, but in doing so, he would risk losing everything: his body, his soul, his very existence. The question was no longer if he could do it. The question was whether he could survive the consequences. Elias sat alone in the darkened room, his mind a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. The suit clung to him, its leather cold and suffocating, pressing against his body like a living organism. The voices had grown silent for the moment, but Elias could still feel them, their whispers scraping at the edges of his mind. The hunger had not faded. It had only grown stronger, its insatiable pull deep within him, gnawing at his very soul. He had tried to fight it, tried to resist, but with every passing day, it became harder to tell where the suit ended and he began. The lines were blurring. His own thoughts no longer felt like his own. Every decision, every movement seemed to be guided by the dark force of the suit. It was no longer just the souls of the dead that were trapped within it. It was Elias too, a prisoner of his own creation. The worst part was that he could feel it. The way the suit seemed to breathe with him, as if it was alive, aware of every thought, every emotion that passed through his mind. It was as if it was watching him, waiting for him to slip, waiting for him to give into. the dark power that had become its true form. But now, a new voice had emerged from the chaos, and it was the only thing that made Elias even consider the possibility of hope. "You're not alone, Elias." The words echoed through his mind, distinct and clear. It wasn't the same voice he had heard before of the trapped souls begging for release. This was different. It was his own voice, but not a reflection of his own fears and regrets. Elias closed his eyes, gripping the edges of the workbench in front of him, the leather of the suit shifting beneath his fingers. The suit responded to his every move, tightening around him, as if sensing his desperation. And with the desperation came the questions. What had he done? What was the price of immortality? Could he undo it? Could he stop the cycle that had consumed him, his brother, and so many others? His mind raced, the fear of losing himself in the suit threatening to drown him. He was trapped not just in the leather, but in the past. His brother, the tattoo, the cursed bond they had shared. Elias had thought he could bring Matthew back, but all he had done was pull them both into an eternal cycle of torment. And now, he was the one trapped inside it. The revelation hit him like a slap in the face. The suit had fed on him, on his desperation, on his obsession with defying death. It had become stronger, more powerful with every soul it had consumed. And now Elias was nothing more than a puppet. His movements, his thoughts, were no longer his own. The suit had begun to control him. Elias' mind blurred as memories of Matthew flooded him. The good times, the laughter, the bond they shared as brothers. But then there were the darker memories: Matthew's death, the fire, the feeling of helplessness. And now this. Elias had thought he could bring Matthew back, but in doing so, he had shattered their bond. Matthew's soul had been consumed by the suit, and what was left of him was twisted, distorted, trapped in a prison of flesh and leather. It wasn't just Matthew's soul, though. Elias had created a monster. He had woven the souls of every victim into the suit, trapping them inside, feeding them to the leather, allowing them to awaken and grow stronger. The suit was now a living, breathing thing, and it wanted more. It wasn't satisfied. The hunger was insatiable. Elias looked down at the leather, feeling the weight of the souls pressing against him. He could feel their desperation, their rage. They were awake, and they were angry, and they wanted out. The suit wasn't just feeding on their souls, it was changing them. It was warping them into something else, something far darker. He knew what he had to do. With trembling hands, Elias stepped back from the table and reached into the shadows, pulling out the remnants of his old tools. The same tools he had used to craft the suits. The same tools that had once made him feel invincible. But now, they felt like instruments of his doom. He had created a monster with his own hands, and now, the time had come to destroy it. But how? How could he possibly destroy something that had become so much more than just leather and flesh? The suit was a living, breathing entity. It was a monstrous monster, and it was feeding on him, on all of them. He took the needle, the same one he had used to stitch Matthew's body into the suit, and for a moment he hesitated. What if this was it? What if this was the moment he destroyed everything he had worked for? What if, in his desperation to fix the past, he ended up condemning himself to eternal torment? But there was no turning back. The souls inside the suit were growing restless. He could feel them pushing against him, clawing to break free. And deep within the leather, he could hear Matthew's voice again. "You can stop this, Elias. You're not too far gone." For the first time in what felt like forever, Elias felt a spark of something hope. It didn't matter anymore. The suit had consumed everything, and now it had to be stopped. He couldn't let it destroy more lives. He couldn't let it control him. With newfound resolve, Elias raised the needle and plunged it into the suit. The moment it made contact, a jolt of energy surged through him, like a lightning bolt tearing through his very soul. His vision blurred, and the world around him seemed to spin. The voices inside the suit screamed in agony, the tortured souls crying out in pain. But Elias didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The leather rippled, buckling and twisting beneath his hands, as though the suit were alive, writhing in pain. And then, something incredible happened. The tattoo in Matthew's tattoo began to glow. The light that emanated from it was blinding, burning through the leather, searing into Elias' chest. The pain was unbearable, but Elias held firm. The suit was fighting back, but Elias pushed forward. He knew that this was his only chance. He had to destroy it, now. With one final push, Elias tore the needle free, and the suit screamed a deafening, horrific sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of his mind. He could feel the souls, Matthew, the others fading, their voices growing fainter, quieter. The pressure in his chest lifted, and for the first time in days, Elias could breathe. The leather began to dissolve, crumbling away in the light. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was enough. Elias' vision blurred as the suit faded into nothingness, leaving him gasping for air, trembling and utterly broken. The suit was gone, but the damage had already been done. The souls were no longer trapped within it, but their hunger had not faded. It was only just beginning. The smoke from the suit's dissolution still hung thick in the air. Elias stood amidst the wreckage of what had once been his creation, breathing in the remnants of the leather and flesh. His hands trembled as he wiped sweat from his forehead. The weight of the suit was gone, but the burden of what he had done remained. The souls trapped inside Matthews, the others, had faded. The light from the tattoo had died out, and for a fleeting moment, Elias felt a strange sense of relief. It's over, he thought. I've freed them. But as the smoke cleared, something in the air shifted. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls of the room had become aware. Elias felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, as if something were alive inside him, clawing to get out. He gasped, stumbling back against the workbench as a wave of nausea washed over him. His heartbeat quickened, each thump echoing in his ears, and then he heard it whispers. At first they were faint, distant murmurs that could have easily been mistaken for the wind, but they grew louder, clearer, more distinct. They weren't his thoughts, they weren't his memories, they were voices, and they were speaking to him. You can't escape us. Elias froze, his blood running cold. The voice was unmistakable. It was Matthews. But it wasn't just Matthews. The other voices, the others joined in, overlapping, merging into one unified cry. You thought you could rid yourself of us. You thought you could destroy us. Elias' breath came in ragged gasps as he spun around, searching for the source of the voices. But the room was empty, silent except for the rising crescendo of the whispers. His mind was spinning what was happening. He had destroyed the suit. The cycle should have ended, but instead, it felt like the very walls of his shop were closing in on him. The voices grew louder still, until Elias was no longer sure if they were outside his head or inside. They seemed to crawl under his skin, burrowing deep into his consciousness. The desperation in their cries was palpable, raw, and he could feel bitter hunger. You cannot kill what is eternal, Matthew's voice taunted. You thought you could break the cycle, Elias, but you only fed it. You gave it power. Elias' heart pounded in his chest as the whispers pressed in on him, suffocating him. His vision blurred and he felt a growing sense of dread. Something was wrong. Something had changed. The suit had been destroyed, yes, but the souls that had once been trapped inside it had not disappeared. They had transcended. They had morphed into something else. The suit had become a vessel, but in the end, it was only a temporary prison. The souls were not bound by the leather. They were not confined by the suit. No, they had become something far worse. They had been released into the world, and they were now part of Elias. The suit had been the vessel, but now Elias himself was the prison. His eyes widened as the full realization hit him. He had been carrying the souls all along, and now they were alive within him, trapped in his body, his mind, his soul. He had become the cycle, the very thing he had tried to escape, and the hunger wasn't satisfied. It had only grown stronger. With a sudden surge of strength, Elias staggered toward the door, desperate to escape, but as his hand reached for the handle, it felt as though the room itself shuddered. The air thickened, the walls seemed to breathe, and Elias could feel the suit's remnants tightening around him like a vice. His vision blurred again, and in that blur, he saw its suit not gone, but transformed, rising from the ashes like a phoenix. It was not whole, not yet, but it was growing. The very fabric of the suit was shifting, warping, as if something inside it was taking form. And then, it spoke. You cannot escape us, Elias. You are us. The suit had become more than just a garment. It had become a living force, feeding off his guilt, his desperation, his actions. The souls within it had changed, mutated into something far darker, and now they were free to roam, to consume. Elias' heart raced. The realization struck him like a tidal wave. The curse of immortality was not simply about life. It was about existence, about feeding, consuming, and never truly dying. He had created something that could never be destroyed, something that lived on, ever hungry, feeding off those who dared to play with death. And the worst part, the suit had fed off his soul. He had become the vessel just as the souls had once been trapped inside it, and now he was part of it. The suit, now half-formed, began to shift in the corner of the room. The leather seemed to pulse as though it had a mind of its own. A form, a figure began to emerge from it, slowly rising, standing tall in the center of the room. Elias could barely stand, his knees weak, his mind spiraling out of control. "You thought you could break the cycle," the voice of Matthew whispered, now echoing from the figure itself. "But there is no breaking it. There is no escape." The figure stepped forward, its face slowly becoming clearer, Matthew's face, but twisted, distorted, as though his brother's soul had been warped by the very hunger it had consumed. And Elias realized, with a chill crawling down his spine, that this was no longer Matthew. This was something else, something worse. It wasn't just a suit, it was a creature, a being that existed on the edge of life and death, feeding on souls, growing stronger with each passing moment, and it was now free. Elias, trembling, felt the last shred of his control slip away. The hunger inside him was unbearable, pulling at him, urging him to give in. The souls inside him, once his brothers, now controlled him. They were inside him, feeding off his every thought, his every breath. The figure, now fully formed, reached out with long, distorted fingers. It was alive, and it was reaching for Elias. "You wanted immortality," the figure growled, its voice a grotesque mockery of his brothers. "Now you have it. You are mine, Elias, forever." The suit, no, the creature was coming for him. Elias had made the ultimate mistake. He had destroyed the suit, but in doing so, he had released the curse that had been trapped inside. And now, there was no going back. Elias thought he had destroyed the suit, but he had only unleashed a far greater horror. The creature that had emerged from the remnants of the suit was far more dangerous than anything Elias could have imagined, and now it was hungry for more. The room was suffocating. Elias could barely breathe, his lungs constricting as he stumbled backward, his eyes locked on the creature that had once been his brother. Matthew's fascino, the thing wearing his brother's face, stared back at him, twisted and warped by the curse Elias had unleashed. It was no longer the suit that haunted him. The suit had evolved into something more monstrous, something far worse. It wasn't just the souls trapped within it. It was alive. It was a creature now, feeding on everything it touched. It had become the hunger. Elias' heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing as he tried to process the horror in front of him. The figure stood tall, looming over him, its eyes flickering with a hunger that sent a chill through his entire body. The leather that had once been a garment now moved like skin, rippling with a grotesque, unnatural energy. "Elias!" the voice whispered again, but it wasn't Matthew's voice anymore. It was an amalgamation of all the voices to trapped souls, twisted by their eternal hunger. "You thought you could break the cycle, but now you are part of it." Elias staggered back, his mind a whirlwind of panic and regret. His creation as monster had become something that could never be undone. He had tried to destroy it, to end the curse, but in his desperation, he had only made it worse. The creature was feeding on his fear, his guilt, and now it was free, feeding on more than just souls. The walls seemed to close in on him as he backed into the corner of the room, his breath shallow, his hands shaking. He wanted to run, he wanted to escape, but the creature was everywhere now. It was inside him. It had become him. The figure took a step forward, its distorted features twisted in a grotesque mockery of Matthew's face. "You created me, Elias," it growled, its voice distorted, its hunger evident. "You wanted immortality, but you gave birth to something far worse." Elias' knees buckled as he fell to the ground, his mind screaming for escape, but his body refusing to obey. The pain inside him was unbearable, an unrelenting pressure building in his chest. The hunger from the suit, the hunger that had consumed him for so long, was now inside him, crawling beneath his skin, feeding on him. His body was no longer his own. He was becoming a vessel for something far darker than he could have ever imagined. "You were never meant to control us, Elias," the creature continued, its voice cold and mocking. "We are not just souls anymore. We are eternal." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. The suit, no, the creature was right. He had never truly controlled it. He had only fed it, nurtured it with his obsession, his greed, and now it had grown beyond anything he could comprehend. The suit had become an unstoppable force, one that could never be destroyed. It had transcended death, feeding on the very souls it had consumed, and now it wanted more. Elias' chest tightened as he realized the horrifying truth. The suit, the creature, was not just an entity. It was a new form of life, a life that lived on hunger. It had fed on him, on his guilt, on his desire to undo the past, and now it was feeding on everything around him. It wanted more than just souls. It wanted life. A thought flashed through Elias. Minda thought so horrific that he could barely grasp it. Could he destroy it? Could he kill what he had created? But he knew the answer. He had already tried. He had already tried to destroy the suit, to break the cycle, but it was too powerful. The creature was alive, and it was feeding on his very essence. There was no escaping it. There was no destroying it. The hunger would never stop. The figure moved closer, its long fingers outstretched, its twisted features locked on Elias. "You cannot fight it, Elias. You are already part of it. You always have been." The words sent a cold shiver through Elias' spine, and for the first time he understood. The creature was inside him now, and he was nothing more than a vessel, a conduit for the eternal hunger it had created. His body was no longer his own. His mind was no longer his own. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Elias forced himself to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature loomed before him, its grotesque face twisted into a cruel smile. The hunger was still there, still inside him, gnawing at his very soul. But Elias could feel something stirring, something deep within. The small glimmer of hope he had held onto was fading, but it wasn't gone. He wasn't completely lost yet. There was still a part of him that could fight. "You're not me," Elias whispered through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible. "You're not my creation anymore. You're nothing. You're just hunger." The creature's smile faltered, its grip tightening on Elias' body as if it had sensed his defiance. "You cannot escape it. You cannot escape us." Elias' mind raced as the creature closed in, but then a flash of memory hit him. The tattoo. The bond between him and Matthew. What if that bond could still be used? What if there was a way to turn the curse into a wapanto, destroy the monster from within? In a final, desperate act of defiance, Elias pressed his palm against the glowing remnants of the tattooist brother's mark. The energy within him surged, filling his chest with fire. The Sutno, the creature, reared back as the mark flared to life, its power pulsing through Elias' body, feeding the very essence of the suit. "No!" The creature screamed, but it was too late. Elias had become the conduit. The cycle was breaking. The suit creature was collapsing. But even as it began to crumble, the hunger still remained. And as Elias felt his body tear apart from the inside out, he realized the truth. No one would ever truly escape the curse of immortality, not unless they were willing to pay the ultimate price. Elias had fought to destroy the creature, but the hunger remained, and as the suit crumbled, the souls inside it were freed to wander the earth once again, hungry for more. The room was silent now, save for the soft sound of Elias' breath, ragged and shallow. His body, now weakened by the unbearable weight of the curse he had unleashed, trembled as he stood amidst the ruins of the suit. The creature ain't no longer whole, no longer the monster it had been, lay in pieces on the floor, disintegrating in the fading light. But even as it crumbled to dust, Elias knew that it wasn't truly over. The hunger, the voices, the terror still lingered in the air, like a faint pulse beneath the surface of the world. Elias could feel it. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting. He collapsed to his knees, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a crushing force. The suit creature had consumed everything. It had fed on his guilt, on his obsession, on his desire for immortality. And now, even though it had fallen, the hunger it had birthed was still alive, still hungry, still waiting. Elias' chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. The voices had gone silent, but the feeling that something was still there inside him remained. His skin crawled, his mind dizzy with the remnants of the souls that had been absorbed by the suit. They weren't gone. They couldn't be. They had become a part of him, just as the suit had become a part of him. A voice, faint, distant, almost a whisper, cut through his thoughts. Elias' heart skipped a beat. He turned, frantic, looking for the source of the voice, but the room was empty. Only the remnants of the creature remained. You thought you could destroy it. It was Matthew's voice, but it wasn't just Matthew. It was all of them, all the souls that had been trapped inside the suit. They had merged, and now they were one endless, insatiable hunger, and it was inside Elias. He stumbled back, his breath coming in gasps as the weight of the realization crashed down on him. The creature wasn't just gone. It had changed him. It had fed on his soul, on his essence. The hunger was still there, a part of him now, twisting his every thought. The souls within the suit had transcended death, becoming something more than just memory, as they had become a part of the cycle. And that cycle had not ended. It had only just begun. The figure that had once been Matthew, the face that had haunted him, appeared in Elias' mind. But this time, there was no warmth, no recognition, only hunger. "You were the one who trapped us," Matthew's voice echoed. "And now, you are trapped too." Elias gasped as the realization hit him. The souls, the creature they had never been fully contained by the suit. They had grown, transcending their form and becoming something more powerful, more terrifying. They had become immortal in a way that Elias never could have anticipated. They had become a force of pure hunger, feeding on death, feeding on life, feeding on everything they could consume. And now, that hunger was inside him. It had become a part of his very being. No, Elias whispered, his voice breaking. No, this can't be. I destroyed it. The figure that had been Mathewis' twisted face still lingering in Elias' mind spoke again, its voice cold and cruel. You destroyed the suit, Elias, but you cannot destroy the hunger. The hunger has always been inside you. It has always been a part of you. Elias collapsed to the floor, his hands clutching his chest as if he could tear the hunger out of him. The pain was unbearable. It was like fire in his veins, like the very core of his being was being eaten away. The cycle had not been broken, it had only evolved. And now, Elias was the cycle. He was the vessel for the hunger that would never stop. You have become us, Elias, the voice whispered, and now we will feed. Forever. Elias closed his eyes, but the hunger wouldn't let him rest. It was inside him, inside his mind, inside his soul. The souls of the dead had become part of him, and they would never let him go. The cycle had claimed him, just as it had claimed his brother, just as it had claimed everyone who had ever been a part of the suit. And now, there was no escape. Elias' body shook with the overwhelming weight of it all. The creature was inside him. The hunger, the souls, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, they were now a part of his being, an endless hunger that would consume him forever. His body was no longer his own. His mind was no longer his own. He'd become the vessel for something that could never be stopped. The room began to fade as the hunger consumed him, pulling him into the darkness. The walls, the floor, the air, they all blurred, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by the force of the souls that had been awakened. And Elias, now nothing more than a hollow shell, was powerless to stop it. You cannot escape, the voice whispered, growing louder as it filled his mind. You are ours now, forever. Elias' last thought, as the hunger took him completely, was a desperate, aching cry for release that would never come. Final payoff, the cycle of hunger had never been broken. It had only evolved. Elias had become the very vessel he had tried to destroy. The souls trapped in the suit had transcended death, feeding on the living, consuming everything in their path. Now the hunger was inside him, an endless force, gnawing at his soul, pulling him deeper into an eternal abyss. Elias had tried to control it, to break free, but the suit, the creature, was not just a garment, it was a force of life and death, a predator that could never be satisfied. And as the darkness closed in around him, Elias realized the horrifying truth. Immortality wasn't a gift, it was a curse that would never end. The hunger would live on, feeding on him and on anyone who dared to wear the suit. Forever, Elias was lost. The cycle would never be broken.